So maybe it's just as well they died before their heads would explode. So yeah, it's always a pleasure to be here, and it's always good to be in a rational country after living in the United States for so long. I have a reputation for being a bit rude, and apparently people keep telling me I have a sense of humor, but I'm here to tell you this is not true. I do not have a sense of humor. What I do is have a bunch of clowns as subjects that makes it really easy to seem like I have a sense of humor. So the kinds of things I will write about on my blog are creationists. Isn't it hard to believe? Here we are, the 21st century, and there are people who are still arguing that the Earth is 6,000 years old. Okay, so the creationists are a hot topic. I talk about skepticism in general. So we have all kinds of prank medicine and all kinds of weird things going down. Just today I posted something about a crazy conference where they're peddling homeopathy and Ayurveda and who knows what else. What else do I write about? It's religion in general. I'm a person who thinks that if you are a real skeptic, if you are looking at the evidence critically, if you are evaluating truth claims using the scientific method, you are an atheist. If you're not, you're doing something wrong. And although religious people can be wonderfully nice people, I mentioned my grandparents, who I love very much, but I would also be telling them nowadays, you know, there's a much smarter way to think about the world, and it doesn't involve going to church. Church leads you astray. I also write about science. In particular, my specialty, I'm a developmental biologist, an evolutionary developmental biologist actually, and mainly what I am interested in is how do we affect innovation and long-term change in morphology in organisms over time. So how do we evolve new features? How do we modify existing features to make new and thrilling things in evolutionary history? The kinds of stuff I do is I do some work on genetic assimilation and accommodation in zebrafish, where we expose zebrafish to teratological agents. Yeah, I make horrible monster zebrafish. It's really cool. The students love this. I've got recipes where you can raise baby zebrafish and make cyclops out of them. It's trivial and it's really easy and cheap. And then you ask what went wrong there? What's affecting the development of midline in the head? This year I've started a new project where I'm looking at limb development. So we're really interested in natural populations of salamanders. What is the variation in wrist structure, for instance? How much natural variation exists in populations, and is that subject to selection? Is it affected by natural agents in the environment? I live in Minnesota, which is, you know, it's got this reputation as this lovely farm state full of liberal Scandinavian type people. It's also intensely polluted because it is an agricultural state, and the rivers are really nasty little sewers of agricultural runoff. So we've got all kinds of weird critters hopping around the landscape caused by this. So we're also looking into that. Otherwise, I'm just going to open it up to questions. Whatever you feel like asking me, I will try to answer. And if you don't have any questions, I'll drink beer. Yes.
Yes, you used the term dictionary atheist. What do you mean by that?
Oh. Yes, another thing I like to do on my blog is start controversy. And a while back, I wrote some stuff where I cussed out people for being dictionary atheists. If you've been around the atheist community for long, you know there are many people who will minimize atheism, who will say that all atheism means is that you don't believe in God. That's all it means. If you go to the dictionary and you look it up, it'll say, okay, an atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in God. And I made some posts where I said, this is not good enough. Because saying you don't believe in God is a conclusion. It doesn't tell anything about how you arrived at that conclusion. And as an intellectual process, it's not very interesting to just flatly give the conclusion, say we're done. And you know, it got me into trouble because what I said was, what I tried to get across to people is that there are many different valid reasons to be an atheist. And I made examples of, for instance, I know people who are social justice atheists who are just simply outraged at what religion has done, and they're not making an intellectual argument about, you know, reasons for believing in God. They're just simply saying, look at religion, it sucks, it does horrible things, I oppose it. And that's a perfectly good reason to be an atheist. If that's why you're an atheist, tell me that. Then there are people like, like Richard Dawkins, who is a scientific atheist, who has evaluated the evidence for the existence of life on the Earth and has found the scientific explanation sufficient and sees no reason to invoke a God. And says, okay, well, until you give me evidence for this great being in the sky, we'll dismiss it. We disagree with it. So what I was trying to get across there is when you talk to people about why you're an atheist, it's not enough just to throw the dictionary definition at them. Say something more. Say something about the reasons behind this, because that's what's ultimately persuasive to people, is when you can actually make a coherent, cogent argument about the subject. And okay, I do like to be controversial, so I'll say this too. There are stupid people in atheism. It's true. There are actually a fair number of them. I've met some of them. Not one of them here, of course. And we have to appreciate the fact that just because we've got a movement that tries to be intellectual, that tries to make rational arguments about the world, not all the people in it are on the same page. So teach them. It's not just religious people we have to educate. It's our fellow atheists we have to explain things to. Yeah.
Yeah. With all your work at SATEM and their blog website, how do you actually manage to work beside it? I always wonder that.
I always get this question, and I'm sorry. My answer is going to be rude and insulting. I'm going to say, how come you're not getting this much work done? What's wrong with you? There's a couple reasons for it. One is, okay, you guys live in Oslo. You've got distractions around you. You've got things like this nice pub and so forth. I live in Morris, Minnesota, and trust me, there's nothing to do in Morris, Minnesota. It's a population of 5,000 people. There is virtually no entertainment there. Instead, we've got 15 churches in town. Okay? So you can imagine, after work, I come home, and there's nothing there. So I reach out through the internet, and that's my mental stimulation. So that helped. Just move to somewhere remote. Go to the Arctic. Is there a question over here?
Well, have you considered moving?
Have I considered moving? Oh, well, yeah. The thing is, I'm at this university called the University of Minnesota Morris, and it's a small liberal arts college. And it turns out to be my academic ideal. This is a job I actively sought out, because what it is, it's a small community, a small college. We're very selective in our admissions. We get top students coming in, and it's got an academic philosophy I really like. Liberal arts education. You don't just come in and listen to biology all the time you're there. You've got to learn philosophy and history and art and all this other cool stuff. And so I really like it that way, and it's good people. So I'm very attached to it. What I would love is for somebody to come along and invent a machine that would just sort of scoop up about a 5 square mile area of this and move it about 150 miles farther east. So if somebody could do that, that would be great. But otherwise, no, I really like it. I've had a few offers from other places, but yeah, I really did. Some people don't believe me about this, but about 10 years ago when I was on the job market searching for it, I had very specific criteria for what I wanted in a job, and this was my ideal dream position, except for the location. Everything else is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, you said you're working on salamanders. Do you think we are ever going to get to the point where we can grow limbs back on again?
Oh, wouldn't that be cool? Yes, I think we will someday. That there's been a lot of breakthroughs in the understanding of the actual processes involved. Now, growing a limb back on us is an extremely complicated problem, largely because we have to reinvoke the growth processes in the wound site, which we don't do. We induce scarring when we damage something. Salamanders develop this thing called a blastema, which is an actively growing tissue that actually forms the whole limb. We'd have to figure out how to switch that on. And then, of course, the other thing you need a mechanism for regrowing the nerves back. That's the really tricky part, getting the nerves back and making appropriate connections. But by doing things like studying salamanders that can regenerate, figure out the molecular switches, see what you can do. There have been some interesting work done on, for instance, spinal cord regeneration, where insights from lower vertebrates have shown ways to suppress scarring in the spinal tissue and get at least partial regrowth. We haven't restored anybody's mobility by repairing the spinal cord yet, but we've got partial regrowth. So there's someday, yes. The rate science is growing. Give it another 50 years. I bet you we'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah, over here, state and church is not separate, but in the United States it is. How come you think that religion is so important?
Yeah.
Religion there and not here.
Right. Something that's special about the United States Constitution is we've got it literally written in the Constitution that there's separation of church and state, that the government cannot impose a religion on anybody. And unfortunately, it's a two-edged sword, because what it means is that nominally the government is not supposed to be involved in peddling religion at all. And what it means is that the government also cannot actively support or oppose the crazier religions that are out there. And this means that it's natural selection, right? It's evolution gone amok. There are so many crazy religions coming out of the United States. It's like a hotbed where we grow all these weird, wacky faiths. They just prop up out of the ground. And most of them wither and die fairly quickly, but others will last and last and last. Good examples are Mormonism, Latter-day Saints, and Scientology. Think about those things. Those things are crazy, and they've lasted. And it's because the government will not argue with them. We also don't have the government propping up a state church. You've got a state church, and that state church will work to suppress competition in subtle cultural ways. So you don't get this flowering of all kinds of religions all over the place. And what that means is, unfortunately, that we are now at a point where we've got so many religions bubbling all over the place, and they've gotten so crazy and so weird that they have started influencing the government in unfortunate ways. And we have an organization called Americans United for Separation of Church and State. It's an excellent organization. They've been fighting this. But they've got all kinds of instances of government actually now promoting religion. So we're seeing an erosion of separation of church and state. We have these things called faith-based charities, for instance. And I know you guys probably like Obama, and we kind of like him too. He's a much improved president compared to what came before. But in some ways, he's actually been worse. And he's actually done more to erode separation of church and state than George W. Bush did, which is shocking and dismaying and a great worry. He's expanded faith-based programs, for instance, and he's done his best to pander to the religious right, and we're kind of worried about this. So yeah, you guys, it's a tricky thing. I think if I had a time machine and could go back to the founding fathers and tell them what to do, I'd say, yeah, the separation of church and state thing is pretty good, but let's make it a lot more specific and add some more clauses in here to really keep state out of influencing religion and keep religion out of the state, because we don't do that. Yeah.
What if there's a big myth that is largely believed that the USA is a very Christian nation and founded by Christian men, or founded on God and all this. And my question is that wishful thinking, or is there other forces enforcing this myth?
There are people actively promoting that myth. No, when you look at the founding of the United States, it was during the Enlightenment, and they were greatly influenced by Enlightenment philosophers, Locke and Rousseau, and that's where their head was at. Most of them, a few of them were deists, and they were completely separate. They actually disliked Christianity, although they would not come right out and say it. Jefferson and Madison, for instance, were not Christians at all. So we've got an input from people who are deists. We've also got people who admittedly were Christians and fairly devout, and so there's a mix of people. And what they did in the establishment of the state was a compromise, which was to simply say this is a secular government, a purely secular government. We allow religion to flourish privately, but not to be enforced publicly. There are a number of people nowadays who are trying to reverse that and say that that we were founded as a Christian nation. They're lying. It's pretty clear we weren't. We were overtly secular. Maybe not as much as the government that came out of the French Revolution, but they didn't last. But we were pretty explicitly secular. So what are we going to do? I don't know. We've got this guy named David Barton who goes around inventing quotes from the founding fathers and peddling them as authentic, and yeah, it's a lot of nonsense. Yes.
Yeah, the polemic language of dialogue and politics in the States is really kind of getting out of control. I mean, even when you watch CNN, it'll be the speechwriter for the right talking to the speechwriter to the left, and they're not even, maybe the guy on the left is trying to be a little bit more rational, but it just seems like they just want to bounce off their talking points, and you just see the same repetitive.
Oh yes.
They're like they don't want to start thinking rationally. It's like they just want to play ping pong the entire time. But I think it's been so long, it seems to have reached a state of equilibrium. Is there any way we can shake that up and make people be analytical?
Yes, it's a curious thing though, because while you're calling it a polemic, I've seen the British Parliament in action, and that's people yelling and shouting and arguing, and they're honestly arguing. I think a lot of the problem that we've got is that the political arguments that are going on are supremely dishonest. That they polish up a little dogma, and they recite that at each other, and there's politicking going behind the scenes that we don't see, I'm sure. But otherwise, it's a set of rock solid position. Well, one rock solid position and one jelly-like position that's set up, and of course the rock always wins.
Yeah.
But yeah, what can we do about that? I don't know. It would be good to have some suggestions. Politics works over here, right? There's no problem.
What politics?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? In India, though the state is supposed to be secular, but there is a lot of religious influence. That's the way individuals are. So we have even had in some universities introduction of Ayurveda as a course, and there is something called Vedic maths as a course, and astrology as a course. And this is all erosion of the secular space. So my question is that with such overt Christianity in the United States, is there a similar erosion in university education as well?
Yes, definitely. So, for instance, I'm at the University of Minnesota, which is a good secular institution. It's a state university. It's the biggest university, and I'm in a branch campus, but the university itself is this big multi-lobe thing that's the bulk of education in the state. And they have something called the Center for Spirituality and Healing. It's got a beautiful website. If you search for University of Minnesota and CSH, you'll find Center for Spirituality and Healing. Their big thing is something called Tellington Touch. which is they come up to you and they don't touch you, they just wave their hands just above. Oh, you've got lung cancer. Let me fix that. You know, it's this kind of thing. And this is actually seriously promoted by the university. And they get a lot of money. They're very well funded. Here, you know, here I am in this branch campus, a small biology department, and we're constantly crying out, please, please, we need supply money, and we get nothing. And here the Center for Spirituality and Healing gets $50,000 dumped on them to bring Deepak Chopra in to lecture, and it just drives us mad. So yeah, it's everywhere. Now, institutions like that are set up semi-independently. So what the university will do is they'll say, oh, we've got a rich donor who likes alternative healing. He's willing to donate seed money to get it started. We'll invest that. We'll hire some faculty to do this stuff. And so it's a very sneaky thing where the university administrators are evil people, I've decided. They're in it for the money. This is what they care about. And so having a rich donor get it started is enough to poison the environment at the university. So we've got, this is part of the nursing program, we've got nursing students who are turned out of this university who actually believe in waving their hands over their patients. It's crazy. I actually did some background research on this. It's called Tellington Touch because it was invented by this woman named Tellington, and she actually used it to diagnose problems in her horses. And she says it works really well, and the horses told her that this worked really well. So. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you say, the lunatic fringe religion has been much marginalized here in Norway and also in the rest of Western Europe.
Not in the United States, sorry.
But instead, I see that we get much more of these Tellington touches and homeopathy and other strange things that I view as even more dangerous for the health of our society. So, would you say maybe could it be better to just let all the lunatics stay in the religious camp, so to say, or is it possible to get rid of both those at the same time?
Yes, get rid of them both. No, but it's a good point. This is a real problem that you can't just say, well, we're going to get rid of religion. We're just going to tell people that it's stupid to believe in God, and we'll be done. What you need to do is teach people to think critically. Teach them to think for themselves. If all you do is wipe out religion, but they're still credulous and they still avoid evidence-based reasoning, then yeah, you're going to get people believing in Tellington Touch or astrology or Reiki or whatever. So we have to go right to the root of the problem, which is start with kids, teach them how to think, show them how to think for themselves, how to do experiments, how do we evaluate the results of an experiment, and hopefully that will improve the situation. Scientists don't fall for that crap, you know. It's like some do, but they're really bad scientists. Well, I can think of one Nobel Prize winning scientist who's fallen for that. So I can think of a couple are weird, but there's only one I can think of who fell for astrology and all this other stuff, and that was what's his name? The guy who figured out PCR. Yeah, his name's... Yes.
You also have Linus Pauling that's been meddling with some... Linus Pauling.
Who?
Linus Pauling.
Oh, Linus Pauling, yes, okay. Yes, your Norwegian accent, it fooled me. Yeah, Linus Pauling, though, he was kind of obsessed with vitamin C and some of these health things. But he actually had a little bit of a rationale for it. So it's, you know, he was climbing the mountain of Crazy Town, but he wasn't at the top. So, yeah. Yes.
There's a political issue that's starting to bother me, and that's, I mean, ever since Full Plate Speech, and now with Elevator Gate and all that sort of thing, there seems to be a kind of polarization. And the middle ground is kind of getting lost. And I mean, I've always thought, and you've said it yourself in the past, that there's room for all sorts of different strategies.
Yes.
But I'm getting the sense from the community now, and now Russell and Ophelia are at each other's throats and whatever, that it sounds like people are being forced to pick sides in a sense. Do you think that we're going to get out of this current political dog show?
Yes, when we crush our enemies. Yeah, what he's referring to is right now the tempest in a teapot that's boiling over everywhere is the issue of sexism in the atheist and skeptical community. And I'm sorry, it's there, it's real. There are individuals who have rather sexist attitudes and do not take women seriously at these various conferences. And you know, when you talk about middle ground in this issue, I think that's a false setup. That there isn't a middle ground here. That there's reality, which is that yes, we have a largely enlightened community, mostly smart people, mostly people who are willing to try and be equals and try to better themselves in interactions with other people. And there's also embedded within this community some idiots, right? Now, I'm actually baffled by people like Russell Blackford because he's defending idiots. And I don't know what it is, but I think that in some people's minds there's just this very well set, very established view that there is a particular way that the sexes should relate to one another, and it's not necessarily an equitable way. And I think he's in that trap. And I think the way out of this is we will eventually move past this particular incident. It will be in the past. I'm sure there will be others that flare out. But the way I'm hoping that we'll get past it is when you're at a Skeptics conference, everyone will stop a moment and think before they look at a woman and say, oh, I want to have sex with her. You know? They might stop and say, well, you know, maybe I should talk to her first and find out what she's doing. And also vice versa, you know, I know all the women have been just chasing after the men, but you know, similarly that we need to be willing to talk. So right now the incident and the strong reactions people have had to it are polarizing and making people angry. But this isn't a matter of a middle ground. This is a matter of an actual situation and growing up enough to resolve it. And I think we will. Give us time. I hope. Otherwise, we'll start a stag skeptics movement where just the guys can go. And no, that won't happen. Yeah.
You mentioned like crushing the enemy, like that's. Really,
I was joking.
No, I mean that's really a dream for like the non-religious community to see the world transition into a more humanistic and rational world, and that is crushing the enemy in a sense. So I think in that like we need to really be strategic about what approaches we want to take, because we are kind of like the Napoleon fighting little battles, and you know we have a really good army with little battalion, but we have a large army to fight against. So what I think the strategy was, can you comment on, like, are we doing the things that we should be doing or something else?
I think it's, you know, in this particular example, I think it's actually good for us that we're having such a heated battle over it, because it is a small thing. The people involved, you know, at the time they even said it was a small thing. Rebecca Watson did not make a big deal of this, which means it's a fairly small it's a small battle, fiercely fought but very small, and I think resolving it does not destroy the movement. So I think it's good for us, and as skeptics and atheists, we love to fight. This is always going to be the case. Come back to us a century from now, and what you'll find is skeptics having battles over, key points and philosophies and little incidents that have occurred. They'll be arguing and arguing and arguing. If you don't want to argue, don't be a skeptic, right? So I think it's painful, but it's good for us. we just have to get things resolved at some point, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the question was more like skeptics versus believers thing.
Yeah,
There are so
issue.
many believers
Yes.
and very few skeptics.
Yes, and again, that's where the multiple strategies are really important. And as many of you know from reading my blog, I'm on one extreme of the approach, which is aggressive, assertive. Let's get out there and just be upfront about it. You know, that religion is nonsense. We've got to move beyond it. And then there's the more conciliatory people who are working a middle ground and trying to bring people gradually into it. And that's the war. That's the big war. And I think that's another one that we're eventually going to win, because one thing I found is that skeptics tend to stay, skeptics and atheists and humanists tend to stay skeptics and atheists and humanists. We are philosophically and intellectually satisfied with these ideas. They are very rewarding ideas. They help us succeed. And so people who join us don't leave. And I think that's the real hope for the future. That's where we'll slowly expand and, yes, crush our enemies and take over the world. But of course, there what we mean is, okay, here's another argument I often hear is, look at those fundamentalist Christians, they're having 10 babies. Or look at those Muslims, they're just breeding like whatever horrible animal you want to analogize it to. And there's so many of them out there, they're going to just swamp us all. And the thing is that we are an intellectual movement. And what I see is, they're producing future converts for us. That all those little children coming out of those gigantic families are going to want better lives for themselves than what they've got. And that what's going to happen is that if we can get to them, if we can teach them, if we can show them a better world, they'll be part of us, and that will accelerate our growth. That's the dream. Another good example of that is look at women. Women in developing countries are having all these babies, right? You look at women in these developing countries and you give them access to contraceptives, you give them assistance with family planning, and they all leap at it, mostly. And birth rates immediately start dropping. If you give women a chance to control reproduction, to get an education, to actually advance themselves in the material sense, we win every time. And the skeptics movement is exactly the same way. This is the place for opportunity, and I think it's going to have it's always going to have wider appeal if we can get the message out. Yes.
Do you think all these crazy readings in America now have something to do with the staggering American economy?
With what?
Staggering American economy.
Yes. This has actually been determined in a lot of sociological studies. If you want to look at where religions are thriving most, where they get the most converts, where they're very successful, look for the places where there's a great deal of economic insecurity. That if you're poor and you're starving and there's no way to get bread to eat, you're desperate for some little tiny glimmer of hope, and having a priest lie to you is at least something. Yeah, so it's correlated. I would not say that the victory of atheism is assured for precisely that reason. If we had a major depression, if we had complete economic meltdown, all bets are off. That's exactly when we would most need a rational approach to the economy and to the world, and that's exactly when everyone will abandon that rational approach. Stupid animals. Yeah.
A comment on what you said. I just read a study, I can't reference it, but that it wasn't that people were poor. They linked the front of countries where there was economic inequality.
Yes.
So what they found that it helped that the country had very rich people, or like a higher class, and they found that these rich people in poor countries were even more religious.
Right.
And the theory behind that was thinking that they're spreading that religion to help make the poor classes stay there and not be dissatisfied.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
If we can still have like depressions if we only get rid of inequality.
Right.
And that we can do no matter what the upturn or downturn of the economic situation.
Right. Yeah, a guy named Gregory Paul has done a lot of work on this, and when you look at the statistics, international statistics, and ask about things like prosperity and so forth, it's a weird thing because you'll get these graphs where there's this beautiful correlation, whereas countries get richer, there's more and more atheism. Except for the United States, which is this weird, bizarre outlier, is one of the richest countries in the world and also one of the most religious. And so it doesn't make any sense. But when you do exactly that, when you say, okay, what if we plot country, economic inequity in a country versus religious belief, then the correlation becomes nearly perfect. The U.S. fits right in there. Because, I'm sorry to say, the U.S. has deep divides between the rich and the poor, and they keep getting wider and wider and wider as our government refuses to tax the rich, for instance. Well, don't get me started on that. Yeah. We've got people who are doing. So we're missing. So one of the things the atheist movement is missing are people like historians who can give us real context on what works and what doesn't work and what has fueled these changes. We've got some people like the sociologist Phil Zuckerman. I don't know if you've heard of him. You should have. He's written these books about Scandinavia. If you read Phil Zuckerman, Scandinavia is apparently paradise. Did you know this?
Jennifer Hecht.
Oh yeah, Jennifer Hecht is good too. These are people who've actually analyzed these situations and said, okay, what makes for a stable, happy society? And when you look at those societies, you find that they tend to be much less religious than others. So yeah, we've got people like that giving a perspective. At my university, there's a guy almost nobody's heard of yet, but he's got some books coming out. Michael Lackey. He's a professor of English and philosophy, and he's recently completed a book on the history of the Third Reich. And it's specifically a book to address that very common claim that, Hitler was an atheist who, another example of those horrible atheists screwing up the world. And he makes a really good case that no, Hitler was a pretty good Catholic. Kind of a weird Catholic, but yeah, he was a Catholic, and that the Third Reich was actually fueled by a lot of religious fervor. So yeah, we've got some people coming up on the horizon like this.
I think we will draw the line there, and just thank PZ for talking a little bit and answering a lot of questions.
And I'll hang around.
Before I let you approach him freely, I just want to give you a couple of messages about what we have planned for the next couple of months. We are working on a couple of these things, and they might not come together, but hopefully we'll be visited by Lawrence Krauss next month. Maybe. Working on it. And in October, Massimo Pigliucci will probably be joining us. And in November, we'll probably have British wonderful nerd Ben Goldacre.
Oh.
I also want to let you know about Denkfest, which is a Swiss free-thinking, skeptical festival conference. It's 8th to 11th of September, so it's very soon. And I have coupons that give you 10% off. And also I want to mention the Norwegian Conference on Science and Skepticism, since I have you all here. The dates for the next one has been announced. It's going to be 18th and 19th of February in 2012. Kristen, one of the other co-organizers, I'm one of the co-organizers, will be showing up with some flyers later in case you want to remember the address of the dates and everything. And that's kritiskmasse.no. And I do believe that was it. And have at him.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know if you want to move inside again or just stay out or.
It's nice out here.
Yeah. Well, let's just all sit outside.
Okay.
Mari, let's do that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no. Get in line, people. Get in line.
Get in line.
Okay, Kevin.